Past studies of human genetics have proposed the theory that modern humans originated from a single population in Africa. But a new paper, published last week in the journal Nature, put this idea to the test and concluded that it does not hold up. The new data is based on the genomes of 290 living people from southern, eastern, and western Africa. The findings suggest that modern humans descended from populations of different hominin species that mix genes rather than on a singular demographic that mutated and evolved in a linear fashion. When asked about the DNA evidence, Eleanor Seri, an evolutionary archaeologist at the Max Planck Institute in Germany, said, quote, "There is no single birthplace. It really puts a nail in the coffin of that idea." Rather than envisioning human evolution as a tree with a singular stem that splits into disconnected branches, the researchers describe ancestral human populations as intertwining stems or cross-species interracial breeding or hybridization. For the new study, the researchers looked at genomic data from living populations scattered all over Africa, as well as DNA from living Europeans and from the remains of a Neanderthal. Jessica Thompson, a paleoanthropologist at Yale University, said, quote, "People alive today may be quite different from those who lived in the same place in the past," implying that one should not look at modern demographics in a given region and assume that is what populations in antiquity looked like racially. Using the modern DNA, the researchers scientifically ruled out the possibility that humanity had a singular point of origin, but instead must have had multiple points of origin, rendering the concept of an African Eve as obsolete and outdated. Had humans originated in one spot, the oldest artifacts would have been found there, with increasingly more recent remains found at sites emanating from the origin, but that's not the case. While the modern genomic studies continue to vindicate the efforts of anthropologists such as myself that have argued against the politically motivated models concerning humanity's allegedly singular African origin, as put forth by the United Nations at the close of World War II. That was over 70 years ago, and it's time now to follow the science and accept that the DNA evidence is correct, rather than insist on what is politically correct. As the woke ideology that has plagued all levels of federally funded academia continues to postulate that there's no such thing as gender, and that terms like man, woman, or race should not be used in the field of archaeology or anthropology, the fossil record and genetic research shows that male and female are biological realities, as is the revelation that the out-of-Africa replacement hypothesis is an Afrocentric Marxist fairy tale that has been officially debunked. Instead, the DNA and actual fossil record tells a very different story for how humans of the Holocene came to be. Anthropologist Susan B. Martinez has a doctorate in anthropology from Columbia University and is author of The Mysterious Origins of Hybrid Man, Crossbreeding and the Unexpected Family Tree of Humanity. She claims that modern humanity did not evolve, but is a mosaic of mixed ancestry, the result of eons of crossbreeding and retrobreeding among different groups, including Cro-Magnon, Neanderthal, Denisovans, hobbits, giants, and other as of yet undiscovered hominins which fall under the general category of Homo erectus. Let us listen to this brief excerpt on what she has to say about the ancient interracial cross-species interbreeding and the origins of the modern races.
How did the different types or races of man, if you will, appear on the planet?
By hybrid mixes. And that's how all the races came about, through mixings and crossbreeding.
Yeah, because I never bought into the story that someone could walk out of Africa and then over time the skin tone changes, the facial features, and the structure of the hair changes. I never really bought into that.
Yeah, and that's what we're taught, and that's what textbooks say, but it's false, and we need to understand what the true history is. Out of Africa, the African Garden of Eden has become a strict part of the Darwinian paradigm. This is where the professors and experts tell us that all mankind came from Africa. I don't believe this is true. This is only about 25 years ago that the African Garden of Eden, the African Eve, became popular and became a fixed idea in Darwinian evolutionism. But it's not true. And as you say, it would be impossible for the African to migrate out and go to Sweden and turn white, to go to China and turn yellow. Those are fairy tales that they're still teaching in school.
While there's always someone who will remark that if Cro-Magnon and Homo erectus could mate and produce viable offspring, doesn't that make them the same species? And the answer is no. There are many examples in nature of different species that can reproduce to create hybrids, but they're understood as being distinct, especially with the advances in genetics made during the last decade. There are similar looking primates, for example, that have a different number of chromosomes, like the howler monkeys in Tabasco, Mexico. And while a small portion of their population do produce hybrids, the hybrids are not allowed back into the general population of either species and are restricted by the monkeys themselves into a hybrid zone, which in effect is a sort of simian racism. Lions and tigers are distinct. They hunt differently, behave differently, look and act differently, yet they can and have produced ligers, which despite popular opinion are viable as their offspring can also reproduce with either lions or tigers. That said, I came across an article this week quoting Professor Stringer, a British physical anthropologist noted for his work on human evolution and considered one of the world's foremost experts and proponents of the now obsolete and debunked out of Africa replacement model, which argued that human species left Africa and mutated into the various races we have today, killing or replacing the other hominins. We now know conclusively, genetically, that this is false, and that the various races exist today because of hybridization. We are all various mixes of these different hominin species. The article articulated what I just said like this, quote, "One definition of a species is groups of interbreeding natural populations that are reproductively isolated from other such groups, according to Encyclopedia Britannica. However, that definition may not apply for Homo species, as recent research describes evidence of interbreeding between Neanderthals, Homo sapiens, and Denisovans, a hominin species discovered in Denisova Cave in Russia. For example, a 2018 paper published in the journal Nature reported evidence of multiple episodes of interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens. Another 2018 paper, also in Nature, described evidence of an ancient human hybrid who had both Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA. This has led some scholars to argue that many Homo species, including ours, should be lumped together, Stringer said. In this paradigm, modern humans are Homo sapiens sapiens, while Neanderthals are Homo sapien neanderthalis, and Denisovans are Homo sapiens denisovans. Stringer, however, maintains that humans and Neanderthals are separate species because their bone structure is different. If Neanderthals and Homo sapiens remained separate long enough to evolve such distinct skull shapes, pelvises, and ear bones, they can be regarded as different species, interbreeding or not. He wrote in an article for the Natural History Museum in London. To that, I would add that there are other indicators that we do not all share the same ancestry, history, and therefore have biological complication with compatibility, such as with blood transfusions or even with reproduction. If mankind evolved from the same African ancestor, then everyone's blood would be compatible, but it's not. Rhesus negative blood type appears suddenly around 35,000 years ago in Cro-Magnon types. Where did the Rh negatives come from? And why does the body of an Rh negative mother carrying an Rh positive child try to reject her own offspring? Humanity isn't one race, but a hybrid species. The article accurately describes ancient interbreeding between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals or Denisovans, two other hominins that lived during the Cro-Magnon era, which is synonymous with Homo sapiens, as Cro-Magnon was the first modern human, a designation that in an anthropological context is different from anatomically correct human. Nothing before Cro-Magnon is considered modern the way anthropologists use the term. That said, there have been other discoveries made through genetic sequencing which speak to further DNA contributions to some races from super archaic species, such as Homo erectus or habilis. The term super archaic implies the specimen are very primitive in terms of behavior and cranial capacity. Another term used is ghost species, as their genetic contribution has been detected but has yet to be officially verified in the fossil record. Present-day sub-Saharan Africans trace up to 19% of their genetic ancestry to these extinct archaic hominin species, likely Homo erectus or Homo habilis, that is not found in the DNA of present-day Asians or present-day Caucasians. So the prevailing notion that we were all hunter-gatherers in Africa and we all started to domesticate animals and we all started to establish large-scale farming and we all started to then evolve into agriculturalists is false. Some hominins were hunter-gatherers for 3 million years straight, and parts of their lineage still are today, such as the Dinka tribe, who are now considered pastoralists, as cows were introduced into Africa by Eurasians a few thousand years ago. But there are hunter-gatherer tribes in Africa today that only became agricultural because of interaction with other species, namely Cro-Magnon types, who were wearing clothing 30,000 years ago. From the moment they popped onto the fossil record, fully developed with a massive cranial capacity larger than today's average, about twice the size of Homo erectus, who they interbred with. This hybridization event is allegedly described in ancient stories, such as the Epic of Gilgamesh, which attributes the reason for this interbreeding to upgrade the primitive hominin or wild man to create a worker slave race so that the Sumerians didn't have to work so hard in the fields themselves. Similar stories can be found in India, which describe a simian slave race used by the gods, which were depicted as a different archaic species. Some in the UFO community insist that the hybridization was done via genetic engineering, like in a test tube, as put forth by Zecharia Sitchin. But if we're to go by what the Egyptians and Greeks said via Plato, the interactions seem to be sexual in nature. Quote, "For many generations, as long as the divine nature lasted in them, they were obedient to the laws and well affectioned towards the God whose seed they were, for they possessed true and in every way great spirits. However, over time the Atlanteans became corrupt. When the divine portion began to fade away and became diluted too often and too much with the mortal admixture, and the human nature got the upper hand, they then, being unable to bear their fortune, behaved unseemly, and to him who had an eye to see grew visibly debased." The time period of Atlantis was during the Pleistocene, or Ice Age, around the same time that these various hominin interbreeding events were taking place. If one were to assume that the specimen known as Cro-Magnon were the Atlanteans, as Cro-Magnon genetics are found on both sides of the Atlantic, such as with haplogroup X, as well as its toolkit, which was essentially the same bifacial tool technology as that of the Solutreans, who incidentally used a tool called an atl-atl, spelled ATL-ATL, which makes a spear go farther and faster. While nobody seems to know the etymology or linguistic origins for the root word for Atlantis, ATL, it is interesting to note that Atlos, when translated into Indo-European, turns out to mean noble, which is also interchangeable for the word Aryan in Iran or India. According to many occult authors, such as Madame Blavatsky and Rudolf Steiner, the remnants of Cro-Magnon, or the seafaring race of the Pleistocene that many call Atlantis, settled in the Caucasus regions around Mount Ararat in present-day Armenia or Turkey at the end of the Ice Age, and at the start of the Holocene disseminated agricultural civilization and Indo-European languages as they branched out in waves, becoming the nobility of the civilizations that they then founded, from the ancient Hittites of Anatolia to the Tocharians of China, the Aryans of Iran and India, to the Minoans, Phoenicians, an original race of North Africa and the Mediterranean, including ancient Egypt, Carthage, Greece, and Rome. In the 1930 lecture of the Aria, 33rd degree Freemason Albert Pike says, quote, "Leppius fixes a date of the reign of Menes, the great monarch of Egypt, at 3,893 and Brunson at 3,643 years BC. The common chronology makes Nimrod or Belus to have lived about 2,500 and Abraham to have been born about 2,000 years before our era. Yet from 7,000 to 10,000 years before Christ, there lived a people in that region which, as the bees send off in the spring their successive swarms, poured out its streams of immigration all over Europe and into India, Bactria, Media, and Persia, everywhere conquering the indigenous races and becoming the Celts of Spain, Britain, and Ireland, and the Northmen of Sweden, Norway, and Denmark, the ancient Goths and modern Germans, the Slavic and Lithuanian races, the Greeks and Romans, the Hindus and the Medians and Persians. You hardly utter a sentence of our English tongue without speaking some words which was spoken in the same sense by that ancient people, 10,000 years ago or more, in the mountain valleys which they first inhabited. You have their idiosyncrasies of thought, the same indelible characteristics of race, for you are their descendants. From them you have your excellencies and your faults, your energy and your vigor of intellect, your philosophical cast of thought, your indomitable resolution, your persistent pursuit of the object of your desire to attain, From them, the religious leanings and inclinations of your minds. From them, your social institutions and relations, and the foundation stones of your laws, customs, habits. From them all your philosophical and religious doctrines. They were white men, as we are, the superior race in intellect, in manliness, the governing race of the world, the conquering race of all the races. They called themselves Arya, the Aryans, the warlike, or some think the noble. They were the ancestors of the Greek and Roman heroes, as well as of the northern Vikings, and especially prided themselves upon which we call manliness, the virtues of the Roman. Although an oversimplification, the Aryans can be seen as sun worshippers, dividing the 26,000-year precessional cycle of the sun into 12, symbolically represented by a ram when the sun is in Aries. So, before the roughly 2,000-year age of Aries, they would have associated themselves with Taurus, a cow or bull, which is attested to, for example, by the Minoan civilization. The bull, incidentally, is also depicted in ancient Pleistocene cave art attributed to Cro-Magnon, which some anthropologists claim is the astrotheology used during the Holocene, as many occult authors claim that the solar cults and mystery schools originated in Atlantis. My name is Robert Sepehr. I'm an anthropologist. My published work is available on Amazon and through all other major book outlets. If you'd like to support my work, you can do that through patreon.com. There should be a link in the description. Please subscribe for future updates. Leave your thoughts below. Have a wonderful weekend, and I hope to see you again soon.